Very good evening, all the friends, all the listeners, all the fellow citizens of the world. Uh, I'm in a mood now to talk for the sake of living. As I have said in the title, that talking with good intention or talking good is like living good or living well. Talking is life because without talking, there's no life. Without listening, there is no life. Without reading, there is no life. Without writing, there is no life. If you consider life in the cultured domain, if you consider life as being uh, uh, as being so many things, we talk, we listen, we speak, we write, we work with the plants, we work for others, we help others, we help ourselves, we live in the family and help one another. So living means doing so many things, and talking is one of them. And I think when civilized people, good people, people who believe in peace and love and all kinds of togetherness, when they talk, then talk becomes like a tonic for those who talk and for those too who happen to listen to those talks. My idea is this, that people say that your life has been all right, good, your life has been excellent. So I mean to say that if somebody's life has been excellent, then that somebody must have talked a lot in his life, or that person might be in the habit of talking, talking with good intention, talking on good subjects, talking for the sake of clarity, talking for the sake of communication. He might have been in the habit of talking for the sake of living in society with friendliness, with the feelings of friendliness, with the feelings of neighborliness and all that. Uh, so life is not that you go on breathing and you go on having food and walking and all that. In a lifetime, if you live 100 years, 105 years, 120 years, in a lifetime, you do countless things. You do, of course, you repeat so many things as we work every morning, we work every evening, if weather conditions permit us to do that. So we repeat. Walking is repeated, eating is repeated, sleeping is repeated, taking bath is repeated, going to meet friends repeated, inviting friends over for a cup of tea repeated. But then uh, there are certain things that you don't repeat on the daily basis. For example, you talk on a subject and you have had nice preparation, or your perceptions of things related to that subject are very, very sharp, very clear, and you are confident about that, then you do that talking, not repeatedly or on the daily basis. As you eat, as you work, as you sleep, as you put your dresses on, because talking on a topic like that and having the audience exhilarated, having the people who are the listeners feel that they have had a very nice time, they have spent the time listening, and they feel grateful to the talkers. Such things don't happen so repeatedly or so often. Uh, mm, I I want to talk on humor, because topics you have, any topic under the sun can be a topic for you to talk on, to talk about, and you can impress your listeners, you can mesmerize your listeners. That depends on how much capacity you have, how much telling capacity, how much beauty you have in narrating things and all that. So I have chosen this topic, humor. Humor is one of the things that people get entertained by. And humor arises out of some sort of unusualness. Humor arises out of absurdity. Humor can be very subtle, humor can be very obvious, humor can be very blunt, humor can be of other different types. And I feel that humor that is made subtly, that is the finest sort of humor. And most of the people who are called cultured, and when you call a person cultured, of course you have certain things in your mind. A cultured person, he doesn't speak nonsense. A cultured person doesn't harm others. A cultured person doesn't speak lies. A cultured person doesn't make people quarrel. A cultured person talks sensibly and lovingly and persuasively. A cultured person is the one who takes some time off to think of art, to see the art, to be, suppose, someone who makes comments on the artistic works done by others and praising others for their good work. A cultured person is the one who has very great faith in the efficacy, in the creativity of music and all that. So when I talk about cultured people, I talk about people who are good. And now you don't need to define what is good. It depends on what makes you feel that something is good. So different people have different perceptions of goodness or good, what we call good. But then there are people who believe that if you are good, that means you are well behaved. Your manners are good, your demeanor is good. You happen to impress others without any ulterior motives. Your your purpose is to please, and please not for any personal benefits, but please because that is the demand for social living. That we shouldn't be offensive, and we should not please for the sake of pleasing. If somebody doesn't deserve to be pleased, you can't please a murderer. You don't have to talk to the criminals repeatedly telling them how good they are. You can't praise them. You can't praise them. So if you don't praise them, they become angry with you, or they have a feeling of vengeance. So, okay, humor. Humor, I remember um, uh, about so many people. R.K. Narayan, the great Indo-Anglian novelist who wrote many novels and many short stories, and the Waiting for Mahatma, or Waiting for the Mahatma rather, Waiting for the Mahatma and Guide, and all kinds of stories that he has written. So he's supposed to have had the ability to produce subtle humor. For example, once in America, he was getting felicitated for his great writing, and for his having the luck of having a brother like R.K. Lakshman, who was a world famous cartoonist, who had been awarded doctorate degrees from different universities of the world. R.K. Lakshman, R.K. Narayan. And R.K. Narayan was extremely famous for making subtle humor, producing subtle humor. For example, in America, uh, he, he was invited, and he was with our friends, American friends, Indian friends. And then at the place where they had to have some sort of refreshment, then somebody asked him, Mr. Narayan, what sort of coffee would you like? Black coffee, white coffee, or what? Then he said, well, neither black coffee nor white coffee, brown coffee. And there was the subtle humor there, because coffee generally is brown. Uh, when coffee is made normally, as most of the people have coffee, then it's brown color. And another that pun was that people in India or in South Asia, they are neither white nor black. Means skin color is neither white nor black. As Nigerians are black, Americans of European origin, they are white, but Indians, no, they are tanned, or they have a dark complexion, or some of them, or many of them have fair complexion. But most of the people in India, their skin color is rather brown, means a kind of brown. So that was the subtle humor. And all writers in the world, wherever they are supposed to have a sense of humor, because writers have to convey great messages, great ideas, great thoughts, and at the same time, they have to keep their readers humored. A story writer is supposed to be very famous or very popular with the readers because of his humor, subtle humor, obvious humor, sometimes a rough humor also. For example, we have Somerset Maugham, and one of the greatest dramatists of the 20th century England. And it is said that it was for the first time that four plays rather of a single dramatist running at different theatres in London. And he was perhaps the first that four plays of his in the 20th century, that four plays of his running simultaneously or around the same time at different theaters. And he wrote one of the stories, The Luncheon, and that story is so much filled with rich and subtle humor that all kinds of readers enjoy that story. Because in that story, the two characters, the one is the writer himself, and the other is writer himself or his spokesperson or his mouthpiece in the story, the narrator. So the narrator can be equated with the writer if it is personal, if it is autobiographical, and that is supposed to be an autobiographical story because Somerset Maugham is writing about himself and he's telling his own story in reference to what had happened once in his life. And many critics say that that was based on the real experience of his life. That a woman admirer of Somerset Maugham when he was young and had just started his writing career and getting popular. At that time, a woman admirer wrote a letter to him that she would like to spend some time at one of the good places in Paris. And he rather felt flattered because a young writer getting fans or getting the mails of fans or getting the praising words from the fans, you feel flattered or you feel happy. Flattered is a negative word, maybe, but you feel happy that someone recognizes you, somebody praises your art, somebody praises your art of writing. So he agreed to be at the Foyot's for a meeting with her and having some refreshment also there. And it so transpired that the woman admirer, she was very talkative, very fat also, and she wanted to have excuses for talking a lot. But she was not the type that the writer, the narrator, Somerset Maugham, had thought of. She had thought that she would be young and very beautiful, attractive, but she was not that type. Even then, for the sake of decency, he stayed on and continued talking as things were ordered for them to eat, to get refreshed with. And the woman, she said with a kind of confidence rather that she would like to eat much because she doesn't believe in making herself heavy. She is interested only in talking about his art, his experience, his ambition in life, and also she said that she wanted to know how does he write that he becomes so popular and his writing becomes so beautiful. So all these things were talked about, but she continued eating so many things. And Somerset Maugham didn't have much money. He had in his pocket only 80 francs, and he had wanted to save some of that money for his maintenance in the rest of the days of the month, because even though he was a doctor by training, he had not been practicing medicine. And as a writer during that time, early years of his writing career, he didn't have uh, much money, or he didn't have even sufficient money to live decently. Means he lived precariously, sometimes having money, getting some royalty or getting some remunerations out of his writings and all. But he was in straits sometimes. So, but she ate 7 items, means she made excuses, and she assured the writer that she was not interested in eating so many things, but she continued eating and she ate expensive items of food. She wanted to have those items of food, and the writer was rather obliged to do that. So she ate 7 items of food, asparagus, ice cream, and peaches, and coffee, and all that. And when and there was a time for parting, the writer was very, very anxious. He thought that if the money came beyond his money that was in his pocket, then he would feel insulted, humiliated, and what would he do then? But somehow he got saved from that embarrassing situation. He had 80 francs, and 77 francs was the amount to be paid. And he paid, but he always pondered over the woman's statement that she was not in the habit of eating much, and she even accused the writer for eating too heavy an item, mutton chop. And in fact, the mutton chop was the cheapest item on the menu, and the writer wanted not to eat anything that was expensive, so that he won't get into the embarrassing situation if the amount of the bill came more than what he had in his pocket. So a chance came in his life later on, some 20 years after, when he met the same woman at a gathering, literary gathering, and this woman recognized him, and she wanted to come near, and she came near. And as he was coming near, the writer Somerset Maugham was rather feeling revenged upon her, because she was extremely fat, 21. They say that she was about 21 stones. In terms of kilogram, she was about 110, 120 kilogram. And then he smiled to himself and said, well, you don't have to tell anything to anybody, because God takes the, the side of the one who is offended, and punishes the one who is the offender. And she was offended because she spoke falsely that she was not in the habit of eating more, but she ate so much, and she was in the habit of eating so much always in her life, and the result was that she became very fat. So humor is a very essential element in life. It depends on the people. You don't like the humor that is cheap, and that doesn't have any aesthetic value. But if again you are cultured, then you love getting humored, you love humoring others, you love telling somebody a story in which you have humor. And writers, as I said earlier, that writers, artists, and even common people, even if you are not a professional writer, you are not a professional poet or a thinker, whatever, distinctive personalities you don't have, but you are a commoner. So sometimes you see something and you remember that because it has something very humorous. In this connection, I remember that novel, the great novel, Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. And in that novel, so much of humor that in every page you 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 get humor, you burst into laughter, because so many absurd things are mentioned, absurd actions are done by the characters, that you have Jerome, and you have Tom, you have Harris, you have Montmorency the dog, and throughout the novel you have the scatterings of very brilliant pieces of humor. Perhaps the most memorable element of humor there in the novel is related to the episode, the cheese episode, that a person sends his friend with some 5 kg or like that cheese, like that amount cheese for his wife who lives in a place. And the cheese actually is extremely smelling. And so the friend of this person who hands him the amount of cheese, or that cheese, 5 kg of cheese, to be given to his wife in a small town, he has to travel by the train. And the cheese smells so badly that even if the compartments are crowded, and the moment he aims to get into one compartment of the train, the smell is so offensive that all the people, they want to save their life. They want, because they can't feel suffocated, they don't want to die in the compartment smelling this cheese, because even when the person was just trying to get into the compartment, it smelled so offensively that people came out, and he had almost the entire compartment to sit in and to travel. And finally, when he reached there, the smell again is so offensive that the wife seems to be cursing husband for deciding to send her that kind of cheese. And she said that no, she wouldn't accept that cheese, and she would rather go out of the house, and she would rather never come back to that house of her husband or of theirs. And finally, the cheese was, you can say, the cheese was buried 30 feet down the ground. And even then, the smell was so offensive that that place became a place of pilgrimage for those who had been the patients of asthma. Those people who had problems in breathing and all that. So, and the pungent smell of the cheese, almost rotten or whatever, um, uh, and that became a place, and people would visit that place to have a whiff of that pungent smell, and then they would feel that, well, they have cleared their nostrils and all. And in the same connection, that thing that I should have told earlier, that when he was coming to the station, he was in a brougham, in a horse-drawn carriage, and the horse that was used, or that was yoked for the passage, and that horse was very lazy, very, very lazy. And even the horseman, the cart driver, was also very lazy. But because of the pungent smell, the horse carried the carriage, or sped away the carriage. That was unusual for the horse. Never in his life the horse had galloped so speedily. So these are the humors. As that Montmorency, the dog, one of the non-human characters in the novel Three Men in a Boat, Montmorency does a lot of antics, as each action of the dog is supposed to be humorous. So every page you read, and you have 5 to 10 minutes to laugh or to smile or to do whatever. Sometimes you have to hold your stomach because you feel tired of laughing. And then you have this Mark Twain. You can name scores and scores of writers and humor makers, humor creators, and humor creators of the great order. So Mark Twain is also one of them. His stories like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and so many other stories, including this one also, The Jumping Frog. And I cite this story, The Jumping Frog, by Mark Twain, the American writer, one of the greatest writers of America of the 19th century, though he died in the 20th century, but most of his works had been completed in the 19th century. And in The Jumping Frog, you have such a subtle humor, and you have reference to two characters. One is the narrator himself, and the other is a weird person. And he had the habit of baiting. He would bet on this, that the flying bird is going to perch on which branch of a particular tree. Or if there are so many trees, then he would bet with anybody. Sometimes he would bet with himself. He would split himself, that he would say that I am betting for myself this, or I am making this point for myself, and I am making another point for somebody else, so that you can play the bet with yourself, intra-personal bet. So there was a man, and he was in the habit of baiting all the time, and he was a hunter, vagabond sort of person, a person living in the countryside, and he would catch fish, he would catch frog, he would catch a kitten, and then he would watch things happening in nature. And if he found anyone who could bet with him, then he would play the betting game, and he would earn money that way also. But sometimes he would do that for the sake of personal satisfaction, personal joy. So on one occasion, this person had a jumping frog because he had trained that frog, and he was in search of someone who could enter a bet with him, because he would tell him that, well, this frog jumps very fast, and no other frog can jump as fast as this frog can do. And if anybody agreed to enter a bet with him, then he would be welcoming that person, or she would rather persuade that person to get into that betting game. So there was a man, and that man was the narrator himself in the story. So he brought one frog from somewhere, from the Masi part of that area, and then they started. But this person who had not been a professional baiter, he did a trick. He just wanted to see the frog of this obsessive baiter who would bet all the time, means about the birds flying and perching where, about the wind blowing and then doing wind turning its direction, about the clouds, suppose you can say, gathering somewhere. So on anything, whatever would be attractive to him, whatever would be odd or strange to him, he would start thinking of getting someone to bet with. So this batter, obsessed batter, has a frog, and that was trained, and he was confident of winning the bet. But the other person played the trick because he made an excuse of seeing the frog of this obsessed batter, so that he could make a study of the frog. But in that process, very stealthily, he put a heavy glass ball, lead ball rather, not glass ball, lead ball, into the gullet of that frog. And then he didn't let this obsessive batter know anything about that, the trick that he had played on the frog. And then he agreed, and the bet started. So the frog that had been brought by the person who played trick on this professional bettor's frog, that jumped faster. And this already trained frog, owned by this obsessed bettor, because of that heavy lead inside the gullet, this frog tried. The frog remembered everything that had been given to him within quotes, through training, but the frog could not because of the presence of that heavy lead ball. And this obsessed bettor in his life, that was a big shock to him. He couldn't believe that could happen, that an untrained frog could jump faster than this ever trained frog, an ever tested frog. And when he got defeated, and then he disappeared, the other person disappeared. He might have won some money, but he disappeared. um, and this obsessed beta, when he tried to find out what might have been the reason for his fraud, so much trained, and about whom he was so much confident, what might have gone wrong. And then he found out that there was a lead ball inside. And so this trick was also a trick filled with humor. We have so many examples of humor. There was one story and that was created between the two great personalities, Thomas Hardy and Samuel Butler. And Thomas Hardy had been admired by Samuel Butler, and they were going to have a show somewhere. Samuel Butler felt as if he had been magicked. He had been musicked magically in the presence of Thomas Hardy. So he was talking about Thomas Hardy's great personality, and then he talked in such a humorous manner, subtly humorous manner, that we, the readers of that story, we felt how brilliant he had been and how nice he had been. So in stories, generally in novels, David Copperfield is a novel, and we have great humor, subtle humor in one of the episodes of that novel, David Copperfield, involving uh, Barkis and Peggotty. Peggotty, the nurse of David Copperfield's family, and Barkis, the cab driver. And Barkis, he thinks of courting this Peggotty, and he practices how to speak with her. So when David Copperfield is being taken to a school in London, then he thinking about how to write a letter, and he gets the letter written by David Copperfield, who was just a boy, And he wrote on behalf of Bakis, the cab driver. And as he wrote the letter on his behalf, he had so much of humor. He felt like laughing, but he kept control over that instinct, and he wrote the letter. When that letter reached Pagoti after Bakis returned from London, after getting him to the place where he had to go to live for his study in London. The letter was read by Pegoti at the time when she was having her lunch. So she couldn't finish her lunch in the usual time that she would do. She took about 3-4 hours because every line or every word that she read out of that letter written by illiterate or half literate Balkis, not written by, means written by him in the sense that he wanted those words to be written, although the writer was David Copperfield Dubois himself, but he wrote whatever whatever Balkis wanted him to write. So that humor also, so much of laughter that even we readers, at the time of reading that, we felt being paced for laughter, and we laughed a lot. My idea in talking on this topic, humor, has been to talk with good intention, talking to make life interesting, because life generally, human life generally, is boring. It needs some excitement. It needs some sort of aberration, playful aberration, intentional aberration or absurdity. You don't do it to harm others, but you just do it to arouse humor. For example, you are not in the habit of peeling a banana and throwing the banana peelings off into the middle of the road. You are not. But sometimes when there are no people coming, and you are along with a friend of yours or an acquaintance, then you do the trick that you throw the peelings into the road, and then you go to the same place and you pretend as if you have not seen anything, and you have slipped down and you have hurt yourself. So, uh, humor is a tonic in life. Humor makes us feel light. Humor makes us feel get rid of tension for the time being. And if the humor is unexpected, the humor is served on us or given to us in artistic manner, in a good manner, then that gives us joy also. So not only our literature, literatures in different languages of the world, but even day-to-day human life is filled with incidents of humor. And perhaps as festivals come to us from time to time to make us feel that, well, don't feel that you are seated all the time or life is so boring, because festivals like Christmas, like Deepavali, the festival of lights, like other scores of festivals that are celebrated throughout the world, these festivals bring in novelties, bring in freshness, bring in changes in our lives. And changes are the spices or spice of life. They make us get free from the circuit of the same routine, in the rotation of the same happening and all that. So human life needs humor, and good humor is much desirable. So I have been talking, or I have talked for half an hour or whatever, and I have lived half an hour. And while I have been talking, I have been living. And this living has been really good, because I have been talking on a topic that has no commercial interest. I have been talking, and my intention has not been any commercial or any anything ill inside it. My intention has only been to live, and in order to live, I have been talking, and I have been talking to people. I have been telling them what I feel about humor. I have given some instances. I have mentioned some writers' names, and not because I know that they don't know, the listeners don't know. They may be knowing much more about humor than I know. They may be citing many more works, many more writers than I have done. But then my point has been this, that all of us like to have some humor in life, and all of us get attracted to good humor, and all of us have an inclination to make our life pleasant, And we realize, most of us, we realize that whenever we do good works, or we listen to good stories, or listen to good jokes, or go through certain bits of humor, then life is energized, or life is egged up, life is gingered, life is given a dose of freshness, and that is so welcome to our life, to everybody's life. For listening now, or for listening in the future, I thank you all. God bless us all. Bye bye.